Sattvam rajastama iti.
Sattvam rajastama iti.
Guna prakriti sambhava.
Guna prakriti sambhava.
Nibbadnanti mahabaho.
Nibbadnanti mahabaho.
Dehe dehinam avyayam.
Dehe dehinam avyayam.
Sattvam rajastamam iti guna prakriti sambhava. Nibbadnanti mahabaho. Dehe dehinam avyayam. Sattvam, the mode of goodness. Raja, the mode of passion. Tama, the mode of ignorance. Iti, thus. Guna, the qualities. Prakriti, material nature. Sambhava, produced of. Nibbadnanti, due condition. Mahabaho, almighty armed one. Dehe, in this body. Dehinam, the living entity. Avyayam, eternal. Translation: material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, almighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. Purport: the living entity, because he is transcendental, has nothing to do with this material nature. Still, because he has become conditioned by the material world, he is acting under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because living entities have different kinds of bodies in terms of the different aspects of nature, they are induced to act according to that nature. This is the cause of the varieties of happiness and distress. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Arijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindha Dinabandha Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Mancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sattvam rajas tamaiti guna prakriti sambhava nibbadnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. The three modes of material nature are being described in this verse. And elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita also it says, Bhunte prakriti jan gunan. The living entities in this world want to enjoy prakriti, the material nature. Prakriti means material nature. And the living entities in this world are trying to enjoy that. Even though here we've heard that they are avyayam, they are eternal. So why? Why would an eternal living entity want to enjoy the modes of material nature? The modes of material nature actually resemble, yes, they resemble the item shown in figure number 1. The modes of material nature are perverted reflections of the modes of spiritual nature. We know of goodness, passion, and ignorance from Bhagavad Gita. And in Srimad Bhagavatam, in one of the purports, Srila Prabhupada talks about 3 modes of spiritual nature as well, which are known as Sandhini, Hladini, and Samvit. So this, we are eternal. We belong to the spiritual world, and we'll get into detail of that a little later. But because we can, for now it suffices to say that the reason we're attracted to enjoy the modes of material nature is because they resemble the real spiritual modes, which is our natural way of existence. It's really enjoyable. It's spiritual happiness. Yes. So there are these 3 Shaktis, these 3 spiritual energies are the energies which serve Krishna and make all the pastimes in the spiritual world possible. They're all the servants, all the devotees in the spiritual world are cooperating under the influence of these 3 modes of spiritual energy. And they all manifest in terms of those energies. So that is the first one we're going to talk about is Sandhini Shakti, which is the eternity. We have heard Ishwara Parama Krishna, Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. So these 3 qualities of Krishna, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, also correspond. Here Sandhini is the Sat potency of Krishna, eternality of the Lord. And so that is actually reflected in this material world in the mode of goodness, Sattva Guna. And if you look at the picture, you'll see that those 2 are close to one another. They're the closest. So if we come to the mode of goodness, that gives us the opportunity as a stepping stone to transcend the material nature and enter into the spiritual realm by the grace of the Lord. So therefore it's recommended we live according to the principles of the mode of goodness. And yes, that Sattva Guna here, the material nature, is a shadow or a reflection of the Sandhini Shakti. In later verses, Krishna explains that the mode of goodness is purer than the other modes, and it's full of illumination, and it frees one from all sins. That's because it is just one step below Vasudeva Sattva, or Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness, which is Krishna's own nature, his Swarup Shakti. Yes. And that's the entrance into the into this Sandhini Shakti, which is the internal energy of the Lord, which all the pastimes are going on under the influence of. Okay. Now the question can come, what's the difference between Sattva Guna and Sandhini Shakti, since they're so close? What is the difference between spiritual and material goodness? So I can give an example from ancient Greek philosophy to illustrate what is material goodness. There was a very old Greek philosopher who is actually the first person to use the word philosophia. His name is Pythagoras. And he talked about 3 kinds of people who go to the Olympic Games. One person buys and sells things. That's the only reason he goes. He's like a merchant. And that person is considered the lowest class of the 3 types of people who go to the Olympic Games. He doesn't actually have anything to do with the Olympics. He has to do with his wallet. That's about it. So that's the lowest quality, and that corresponds neatly to the mode of ignorance. Then, above that, he says, the students of Pythagoras say, that the higher than that is the second-class person who's the athlete. The person who's actually doing the sports. He's throwing the discus, seeing how far he can throw the disc, and achieving those physical perfections, those mental perfections in terms of discipline as far as the mind relates to discipline of the body. That is considered the second-class position according to Pythagoras, and that's pretty much like the mode of passion. Really trying to master this world, right? That's the mode of passion. And then the material mode of goodness. He says that the highest class of person is the spectator. The person who's just watching the Olympic Games. He's not really invested in the physical activity of the athlete, or he's not there just to buy some trinkets and souvenirs. He's there, he's aloof, he's observing everything. He's judging to see who is exhibiting the highest perfection. And he is in that so-called transcendental position. But there's still a ceiling. It's not fully transcendental to the modes of material nature. It's not really spiritual yet. But you can say it's like it's still matter, it's not really spiritual, but you can say it's approaching spirituality. It's approaching spirituality because there's a little of that detachment there, a little of that knowledge. So then, spiritual goodness begins when we really turn away from this material world as an object of our enjoyment, either directly or indirectly, grossly or subtly, and then we turn to eternity. Eternity, right? So that is the Sandhini Shakti, and it's also known as Brahman. Brahman is not a very specific name. It means the greatest, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. It's not exactly specifying the nature of the Lord. We also say God in English, but the word God doesn't exactly tell us too much about the nature of the Supreme Personality. So this is a beginning. This is the how we approach spirituality. We're approaching spirituality from this point. It begins with Brahman. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now that we have reached the plane of human existence, having passed through 8,400,000 species of life, now, therefore, we should inquire into Brahman. This is the beginning of spiritual life, as described in Vedanta Sutra. So, the people who are on this platform of Brahman realization, they know that the Lord is somehow beyond all of this material world. It's not any object of our sense apprehensibility. But when you ask, well then what is the Supreme? What is Brahman? They may say, it's some light. It is one. But pretty soon they run out of words.
They have a word for that, nirvachaniya.
Anirvachaniya, yeah. Now that Anirvachaniya is what they say when they run out of words. They say that it's beyond words. That you can't talk about that thing. Now, that is actually a fallacy, because just because you can't talk about it doesn't mean that it can't be talked about. And the acharyas do talk about it. But this is like turning agnosticism into a dogma. So the fullest realization of the Lord, of the Absolute Truth, is the Lord, his eternal spiritual form. And Srila Prabhupada gives a beautiful example of that eternal spiritual form in the shape of a mountain. When you approach a mountain, one of these very big mountains, by the way, in North America and in Europe, we don't have such big mountains. Our mountains are something like the foothills of the Himalayas. Yeah. If you go to Kathmandu, which is Nepal, there's a lot of plains there, and then suddenly you start seeing the foothills of the Himalayas. And that's like the Appalachian Mountains, Smoky Mountains, the Alps, all these things. But if you keep going, then you start to see really big mountains. There's a mountain called Annapurna, which is by the Kali Gandaki River, and that river is where you can get Shalagram Shilas, which are a kind of incarnation of Vishnu, which is worshipped. They are stones that are only found in that river. So on the way to that mountain, it's huge. It just, you see it in the distance, and at first, because you're so far away, you may not know, is that a mountain? Is that a cloud? But as you keep coming closer, oh, that's a solid mountain right there. And it stops your thinking. You just, wow. Hare Krishna. So that is something like the progress that a person makes, a transcendentalist makes, as they go to higher levels of realization of the Supreme. At the beginning, there's this understanding of Brahman, Brahmajyoti, the light of the absolute truth. But as one progresses farther along the path under the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master, then one gets more details about the nature, the form, the pastimes, the holy name of the Lord. And all these details bring one to a level of intimacy, an intimate understanding, a personal understanding of the Lord. And one is no longer occluded by the atmospheric perspective of which is caused by being distant from the absolute truth. As one gets closer, the sky becomes clearer, less hazy, and one is able to see the Lord as He is. And that's actually achieved by the grace of the Lord. But He hears us. Does anyone know what the game Marco Polo is?
I heard about it, but I don't really know.
You don't know? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. We have a couple back here who know, so we're gonna demonstrate for everyone. Marco.
Hello.
Hey, Hare Krishna. You're expert. Okay, so that's the game, and you can shut your eyes and do this, and then gradually you'll come closer and closer until you find one another.
Okay.
Echolocation. Hare Krishna. So this Hare Krishna Mahamantra is something like that we're chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, and ye yatam mam prapadyate tam stataiva bhajamyaham. Krishna reciprocates. Didami buddhi yogam tam. He gives us knowledge within the heart of how we can come to Him. You see, that is this process of attaining spiritual knowledge. What is not the process of achieving spiritual knowledge is using our human knowledge, our human brains. The human brain. Some of you are medical experts, so you know about the wondrous makeup of the human brain. But despite all of its amazing qualities, despite the fact that none of us can even create a mouse's brain, what to speak of a human brain, this brain still has its limitations. It is surrounded on all sides by big question marks. No matter how advanced science gets in any particular field, it always reaches a limit beyond which there's only questions, there's no more answers. So this method of approach is never going to be suitable for understanding the supreme absolute truth from which our brain has come. That's our limit. So that's our spiritual and material knowledge. Right now we're talking about the mode of ignorance. So-called knowledge of that is produced by our human brain is actually in the mode of ignorance. Whereas knowledge which is given from the Lord is of the nature of Samvit Shakti. Right. We're actually still talking about the same thing from the beginning. Human knowledge is this guy, mode of ignorance. And the knowledge we get from Krishna is up here, Samvit. You see, it corresponds. It's a reflection. Human knowledge is a reflection of the Lord's knowledge. The mode of ignorance is a reflection of the Samvit Shakti. So then what is to be known? What is the proper object of our knowledge? What are we to seek after? That's the next Shakti. That's Hladini Shakti. Spiritual and material bliss is the next subject. And don't worry, this is the last illustration.
But they're actually quite phenomenal.
Spiritual and material bliss, yes. The glories. Actually, this, the affairs between men and women are the essence of material, the mode of passion. Mode of passion, which is the material perverted reflection of the original bliss known as Hladini Shakti. Hladini Shakti. Or the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna in the spiritual world. His pastimes, in the material world also, all the big projects we undergo, like I want to conquer the world, or I want to establish a big civilization or something, this is all based on Rajagun, the mode of passion. And we all know where that one actually stems from. We're trying to impress someone. You see, this is the mode of passion. We're trying to be the king, we're trying to be the master. Or if we can't be the master, we're trying to get in good with the master. You see. But the real perfection of bliss is available in devotional service to Krishna. That is governed by the Hladini Shakti. Yes. So all this is going to, just to answer the original question I asked in the beginning, why would an eternal living entity try to enjoy the material modes of nature? Because they resemble these original spiritual modes of nature. Yes. But there are differences. Even though they resemble the modes of spiritual nature, there are differences, several differences, two of which are primary. The first, of course, is that under the material modes of nature, it necessitates that you have to turn away from Krishna. You have to forget Krishna. If you try to enjoy in this world and be Krishna conscious at the same time, it makes a big mess. Of course, it's better than ignoring Krishna, but it's impossible. It's impossible. Because Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. You always remember that Krishna is there. And if you're trying to ignore him and be the big shot, then Krishna, you can basically hear Krishna just laughing at you.
Yeah. That's true.
And sometimes the devotees also laugh at you. That is their mercy. Sometimes the devotees are more merciful than the Lord, isn't it so?
That's very true.
Yes. So that's one of the downsides of this material energy, that you have to turn away from Krishna. And then you get to think, I am Krishna. And it creates an alternative world called Columbus, Ohio, in which you think you get to be Krishna. So the spiritual modes of nature are all serving Krishna. And the material modes of nature are our attempt to serve ourselves and get others in on the conspiracy. For some reason, due to lack of conviction that we will be happy with the modes of spiritual nature, we've turned away from Krishna and come here. And we started to speculate that it would be better if, instead of being the servant, I could be the master. So there's a spiritual disease that's haunting us. Now there's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada who knew Srila Prabhupada. He met Srila Prabhupada in 1966 itself, one of the very first of the early disciples. And in New York City, he would attend the Sunday feast program. This was before he was initiated. At that time, his name was Lon, L-O-N. And later, he was given initiation by Srila Prabhupada with the name Prabhupada Das. And now, a few years ago, I think 2013 maybe, he was given sannyas also. And his name is now Bhakti Prabhupada Vrata Damodar Swami Maharaj. Yes. Yes, in my...
longer than long.
Yeah. Prabhupada is still in the name. And he told a story that when he was still Lon and going to the 26th 2nd Avenue Sunday feast programs, he saw one time that after the class, Prabhupada was saying the Prema Dvani, Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa, and going, everyone is bowing down. But instead of bowing down, he stood up and he put his arms out like this. And he was thinking, and now a little description also. He was wearing a fur coat, which was about 10 pounds, and it went down to his feet. Thick, heavy, long fur trench coat. He had a third eye pasted on his forehead. And when he stood like this, he wanted to make sure that Srila Prabhupada saw his universal form. That was the idea. And Srila Prabhupada, seeing this, went like this. Now he told in this, the way he tells it, he said, now he says, when I think back on that time, I'm meditating on why Srila Prabhupada did that. And he determined that Srila Prabhupada must have been offering obeisances to Krishna's illusory energy, Maya. But at that time, when he was still in Lon form, he thought Srila Prabhupada was acknowledging that yes, in fact, I am an avatar. All these other people are servants. They are bowing down, but I am different. So Swamiji is offering his respectful obeisances to me. So around that time, he says that his life took a big turn around that time. He got arrested by the police and locked in a mental institution. I wonder how that happened. He didn't tell that part of the story. But he was eventually released, and he actually came and took shelter of Srila Prabhupada and became a very wonderful example for us all. But this is the material disease. I am an incarnation. I am God. We become puffed up. We want to be mastered, and we get captured. We get arrested. This happened also. The Lord does the same thing that Srila Prabhupada did. He offered his respect. Once Lord Chaitanya met a so-called Vaishnava named Jagannatha Dās. True story. This was in Puri. This was in Jagannath Puri. I have not been to Jagannath Puri. I'm trying to distance myself as far as possible here. And this Jagannatha Dās went to Lord Chaitanya, and he wanted to get approval from Lord Chaitanya. So he said, "Oh, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you are Krishna, and I am Srimati Radharani." And Lord Chaitanya went like this and said, "Sir, you are Ativadi, which means you are too great." And this Jagannatha Dās took it as a compliment. He thought it was really like, wow, I am authorized by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But all the real followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu knew exactly what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was up to. And because Lord Chaitanya said, what did he say of himself? Dasa das anudas. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. So, since that's the ideal, then saying, you are too great, we can all kind of guess what that means. Later actually formed his own sampradaya, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes this as one of the 13 Upasampradayas, the Ativadis. And they still have a big temple in Puri, which you don't have to go see. The condemned position in this material world, we start to think it's wonderful. That is called conditioning. So we're conditioned by Maya. Nibadnanti, in this verse it says, they do condition us. So, you may have, I wish I made a drawing for this one, but I didn't. You may have heard of Pavlov and his dogs. Some of you have heard? Yes, some have heard. Some have heard. There was a Russian scientist in the 1920s, I believe Vladimir Pavlov, and he did a little experiment to deal with the concept of conditioned reflexes, where he would have a dog in a science laboratory, all right? And he would ring a bell, and then the dog would be given food. And every time he rung a bell, the dog would get food. And after some time, now what happens if you give a dog food? It salivates, it drools. So I like to call this God rules, dog drools. So he rang a bell and the dog would salivate because he knew the food is coming. But it got to a point where Pavlov had so conditioned the dog that he could ring the bell without any food and the dog would still salivate. This is called conditioned reflex. So this is exactly our condition in Maya. Maya is attractive enough to arouse desire for us. But you cannot get satisfaction at all from that. Just like you cannot eat the sound of a ringing bell. But that was not planned.
Where is Prashad?
Prashad? Is anyone salivating? So asha pasha shata shata klesha abhirata. The living entity who's influenced by Maya has so many desires, unlimited desires, and they're never satisfied. No matter how much you try, it's never going to satisfy you. And even if you may have your list. Right now there is something called a bucket list. you may have yours. And even if your list is modest, and in the US, who's modest, honestly? But even if you have an unstatistically modest list of things you want to accomplish in your life, and you get all those checked off, you're still not going to be satisfied. It's always going to be something more. They say too much is never enough. You'll never be satisfied because there's always going to be one more thing on the horizon. You got the Ferrari, but you didn't get the Lamborghini.
Yeah. I want to get that.
And you get frustrated. You get frustrated. Even if you get it, nobody can repair that thing. You must know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't repair it. You can't be satisfied with it, so you get frustrated and you turn to a little whiskey or maybe some opiates. And you try to dull the frustration. You try to obliviate yourself. Or maybe you just sleep because you're too poor for any of that, so you just sleep all the time. That's the poor man's opiate. Tragic life. This is called the mode of ignorance. And you'll never be peaceful trying to pursue these things because they are asat, achit, nirananda. Krishna is sat, chit, ananda. Eternal, full of knowledge, and full of bliss. But in the material world, it's just the opposite. So, here we go again. We have Sandini, which is Sat, Samvit, which is Chit, and Hadini, which is Ananda. But in the material world, we have the mode of goodness, which is actually Achit. We have the mode of ignorance, which is, Asat, and then ignorance, which is Achit, and then passion, which is Nirananda. It's temporary, full of ignorance, and full of misery. Put that on your resume. Qualifications: Asat, Achit, Nirananda. Give me a job. That's called being a candidate for hoping against hope. To use one of Prabhupada's interesting phrases. And our conditioning means that we accept this situation. If a devotee tries to provide a positive alternative to all of this, they say, I'm good. No problem. We just want to taste something, put it in the mouth, and that's our happiness. We chew it. Charvita charvananam, chewing the chewed, Prahlad Maharaj describes. And it's nothing new. It's not a recent development, our conditioning. Anadi karma phale pori pavarna bhajale. From time immemorial, we have been cresting and submerging in the ocean of repeated birth and death. We can be confident that we have occupied every one of the 8,400,000 species of life already. And we've done it more than once. You have been an aardvark. Does anyone know what an aardvark is? Yes. Yes.
It's a very strange looking animal.
Yes, and we've been there, done that. We have been a hippopotamus. And Srila Prabhupada has given us access to the science of Krishna consciousness so that we don't have to go back there. So we don't have to be bound up anymore with these modes of nature. We can choose the alternative, which is to get in touch with the spiritual nature. So how do we do that? We need help. And the help is here. Like literally in this room, it's here. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Purna Shuddho Nitya Mukta Abhinatvam Nama Namito. One more time with the sign. Nama Chintamani Krishna's. So this word Chintamani is referring to the substance of the spiritual world. Chinta means consciousness. So everything is formed of that consciousness. It's eternal. That is the Sandhini Shakti, Nama Chintamani Krishnas. And what is that? What is the nature of that Chintamani stone? Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. It is the form of eternal ras, sweetness. Rasa Vigraha. That's the Sandhini Shakti. Purna Shuddho Nitya Mukto. It is eternally pure and it exists in the eternally liberated stage or platform. Liberation occurs when one has transcendental knowledge. Knowledge that I'm not this body. Who am I? I'm the spirit soul servant of Krishna. That knowledge is liberation, Nitya Mukto. That knowledge is the Samvit Shakti. Everything is there in the holy name. The whole spiritual world is there. We have what we need. And if we can't convince ourselves to chant, there are at least 45 more people in this room who can help us. And that's the way we show our love for one another. The highest way. Of course, there are also many ways, but that is very important, that we encourage one another in our chanting. Giving ourselves that help so that we can easily access this spiritual realm in the Kali Yuga. By that association, our association with the material modes of nature comes to an end. And we can go back home, back to Godhead. Thank you. I think there's some time for questions. Mother Kamagiri, was that a question? No. Okay. Yes.
So I was wondering, so you had mentioned that the controller of the Sandhini Shakti is Balaram, the controller of the Hladini Shakti is Srimati Radharani, and the controller of the Samvit Shakti is Shri Krishna. And it just occurred to me as you were speaking that if there might be some relation between their colors being white, gold, and blackish.
Please go on. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I was hoping you would, but so this association hadn't occurred to me. But so their colors, of course, are transcendental. So they're not actually colors that appear in this world. But the color of the associated with the mode of goodness would be white. So that you said that's the material mode of goodness is the reflection of the spiritual Sandhini Shakti. The color associated with the mode of passion, I would think, would be more reddish. But
in one of Prabhupada's purports, he does give them red, yellow, and blue.
Yeah. But anyway, so Tapta Kanchana is molten gold.
Srimati Radharani.
Srimati Radharani. And the color of Krishna is like a thundercloud. So it's blackish blue, kind of clear color. And he's also the taste of water. So
there may be some correspondence. Yeah, I haven't thought of that also.
Okay.
but Prabhupada does talk about the colors red, yellow, and blue with reference to the three modes of nature in the Bhagavatam in a purport. He says that the mode of goodness is often conceived of as the color yellow, the mode of passion as the color red, and the mode of ignorance as the color blue. That's given. Jai. So sometimes we get the blues. That would be the mode of ignorance. Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, so the comment I was trying to make was mode of goodness, passion, ignorance. So in the material world, ultimately it's all coming from the ignorance.
Yes.
So ultimately my understanding is that it's all coming from ignorance. So so-called passion, so-called goodness is also the source had ignorance. So ignorance is actually the where the living entity decided not to be associated with Krishna, but independently. So that's where they come into contact with the Mahatattva, which is Pradhana. From there, the rest of the things, which Balarams facilitate that one. So it's goodness, passion, ignorance is also has a source is ignorance. They come from the darkest cloud. So then it transforms to many other the layers. So everything, the source ultimately is actually coming from avidya, which is ignorance. So it's called false ego. The false ego manifestation at the time, under the purview of ignorance, is all manifestations. But when it gets reflection, it seems to be that there is no corresponding reflections. It appears to be analytically, we can explain the mode of goodness, a reflection in spiritual world, passion, reflection. But eventually all these things is only one source. But whereas in spiritual, like Sandhini, Samvit, there's also Sri, Bhu, Nila. There's many multivarious. This has many purposes.
Jnana, Bhava, and Kriya also.
It's ultimate. There's actually, first is 3, then 8 and 16, 24. There's so many unlimited qualities or energies of Krishna, but many of them predominantly works in the spiritual world.
Yes.
But in the material world, it's no actually one-to-one relationship as a corresponding, but analytically or allegorically we can explain. That's what my point was.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, everything comes from Krishna ultimately. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samamita. That much we can be sure of, that Krishna says that all of the spiritual and material worlds are coming from me. And Buddha bhava samanvita, those who are wise, they will worship me with all their heart. Yes. Is it 12:30 or 12:45 I'm supposed to? Great. We have time for another question, or comment, or correction. Now, one time Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was talking with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, or rather listening to his explanation of the Vedanta Sutra. And he didn't say anything for several days. And Bhattacharya said, now there are two reasons why someone would listen without speaking. One is because he's understood everything perfectly. The other is because he hasn't understood even a single thing. So I always take the question and answer at the end of a class as a barometer for whether the audience has found it at all comprehensible, or if they're fully satisfied. And I'm always wondering about that thing when there's no questions.
The audience is astounded. The audience is going to think about your class for the rest of their life. Hare Krishna, that's what we do.
Govinda Prabhu.
Sometimes people shed tears when they're happy. Sometimes people shed tears when they're sad. So both tears, how do you know the difference? That this guy is sad or happy?
Arjuna has given a good answer. Cold tears and hot tears.
That's right.
Govinda Prabhu, do you have some personal realization of this?
No.
Oh, okay. No, I think I've personally seen tears come from your eyes when you chant. Isn't it so?
I don't know.
Hare Krishna.
That's a cold tears.
Those are the cold tears.
Yeah.
I have to take it because the son is the representative of the father.
Why quote on Whoa.
The cold tears are out of love, but the hot tears are out of sadness and anger.
Exactly.
The mode of passion. But when we have a cool head, we can understand Krishna. This is philosophy for those with a cool head and warm legs, as Prabhupada said.
What about any other color?
What is that?
Is there any other color of yours ignorance?
Oh, now we're getting into colored tears, and this is beyond my ability to comment any further. Rajavidya Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Thank you very much.
Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadha, Shivasati Gaur Bhakta